Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Grain Feed, brought to you by EverAg. This is your weekly news feed for all things grain and all things feed. Each week we bring you updates on the markets with unique perspectives from an amazing team of analysts with the intention of helping dairy and livestock producers manage their risk. I'm your host, Jim Matthews, reporting from a very warm Chicago. Had yet another light rain pass through this morning. Of course, it's been that kind of year, but otherwise, it feels like summer is officially starting here up in Chicago on this Thursday morning. Joining me today, as always, from Kansas, Director of Feed Procurement, Mr. Jake Kingsley, and making his first appearance on the Grain Feed, a very special guest from Urbana-Champaign. We have the University of Illinois Extension farm broadcaster, Mr. Todd Gleason. Team, how are we today?
Doing very well. Just fantastic here in Champaign-Urbana.
Excellent. Todd, how have things been down in Champaign-Urbana? Everything okay?
Well, I know you keep pretty close track here in East Central Illinois, and I've been out. I was last week to a horticulture event near DeKalb, which is not too awfully far from Chicago, just to the west of you, 80 miles or something along those lines. And all the way up from Bloomington on Interstate 39, the crops look fantastic. The first time I went up that way was about 3 weeks ago. I was surprised that I really thought that they had not planted it at that time.
Yeah.
And that crop looked good even then. Here in East Central Illinois, I was out yesterday and made a trip actually Saturday across to Springfield, which is right dead center and straight west of us in Champaign-Urbana, about 80, 90 miles, and did that on blacktop because that's the way I like to travel. And the crop looks fantastic there. And the soybeans looked really good for the most part. Particularly, there were some areas that had gotten in early, and they looked very, very good and big. The corn, was probably somewhere between ankle and thigh high, depending on when it was planted. But some of that looked fantastic as well. So I think the crop, at least here in a large part of Illinois, is off to a really good start. I will say that around Mount Pulaski, which isn't too far from Springfield, they had some gully washers, but a very isolated area and just awful, just really awful in that area that was so wet, and they probably they're behind, and their yields will suffer pretty dramatically, I would think.
It's been spotty, right? And I think we've been hearing very similar reports around, Todd, in terms of what was ultimately planted and has emerged. I think for the most part, things are actually looking very healthy. But yeah, then we hear some of the more isolated pockets in certain parts of the Midwest where, some folks that we speak to, ranging from South Dakota across to Wisconsin and then the other side of the big lake into Michigan, Indiana. Some folks have not even been able to plant just yet. Again, largely isolated situations, but still notable, though, that there are a pretty decent amount of folks out there that haven't had a chance to actually make this happen yet. So we're relieved to see the bulk of the United States ultimately get that corn in the ground. And like you said, what has emerged looks good. We just got to finish up a few of those later patches here. Jake, how are things looking in Kansas?
We're doing pretty good. We're catching a little bit of a heat wave here. Supposed to have our first 100-degree day today, in fact.
Okay.
But soil moisture's been pretty good. Beans and corn are off to a really good start here. And we're hearing from folks in Texas, Oklahoma, and now in Kansas that the wheat crop that's coming off is average, which is a big relief after the last 2 years of less than stellar production. So hearing some pretty average yields, good quality, 11.5% protein is probably going to get us close to the overall crop there. So things are looking pretty good in this part of the world so far.
Average is good, Jake. Right? That's all we can ask for with wheat.
If everybody can be average, we'll be in a good spot by the end of the year.
I would say on that note, Jake, that those folks in southern Illinois, which is where our primary wheat acreage is, mostly in Washington County, just one county, their combines are rolling, and the soft red winter wheat crop is good as well.
Okay, excellent. And Jake, we've got to get used to the fact that, so Todd, Jake used to report out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So for him to feel the need to tell us he has a 100-degree day, that became a day-to-day thing. I felt like starting around Easter, I think, most of the time. So for Jake to now report one pushing through mid-June. This is a big deal.
It is a very big deal. It's a very big deal. I think we've bought an extra 60 days sub 100-degree temps.
Okay.
Pretty good. Pretty good. Just a little jump up I-35. Do wonders for your summer.
Who knew? And it looks like your plant is also managing the different climate very well.
Yep. Made the move to the basement, ready to go.
Okay. Good to hear. All right. So, gentlemen, we've got a lot to run through today. And Todd, we'd like to hear a little bit more about what you do at the University of Illinois Extension. So let's just timestamp the markets real quick. So, Paige, if you would kindly help us timestamp those markets. It is Thursday morning. It's close to 10:30 Chicago time. Just looking at the board real quick, following yesterday's WASD report, the screens are green. So the market was trying to figure out for a bit yesterday how to interpret and digest some of those numbers. But following that digestion, if you will, we've opened up today in the green. We've got December corn trading right at $4.75 at the moment. That's up about 6 cents on the session here today. So corn finding a bit of a pop after yesterday's report. We've got November beans trying to hug that 1160 mark. We haven't quite hit it yet today, but that's up about 11 to 12 cents in Chicago. And then soybean meal, that stubborn little byproduct. We're back up again today. We keep riding that $350 per ton level on December meal, and we've bounced up from it again here this morning. We're trading right around $357 per ton on meal. And then wheat, just because we're talking about wheat on our little show today, we've got December wheat futures at $665. I won't say where it really hit. We'll go with $665, which is up about 5 or 6 cents on the session here today. So wheat, after having an astronomical, if that's even a word, climb from late April in through late May, and now what has been a large break pretty much the entire month of June, is starting to steady itself out a little bit, really leading up to that WASD report, but also then after digesting these numbers, starting to stabilize here over the last week. So a lot to run through in the markets. But Todd, it's great to have you on the show. If you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of background to what you do. We've already talked about what you've been seeing from your own pavement crop tours here across Illinois over the last couple of weeks, but what you do there at U of I and what you do on your show.
So I am employed by University of Illinois Extension. I air on WILL AM 580. You can see it's been on the air since 1922. The very first broadcast, by the way, was about dairy cows. You will be appreciative of that. Turning Cream into Gold, I believe, was the title. It was
There you go.
In 1930, I want to say 6 or 5, one of the two, we started to, over the air, broadcast the numbers from the Chicago Board of Trade. So we've been doing that for a long time and have ever since. The current programming, I was an undergrad in 1985 when what we do today started. So I have been on the air at WILL in some form, with the exception of 1988 in each year since then. And that programming remains fairly constant and the same. And not only have I been on the air that long, but there are other analysts that have been on the air as long. One of them just retired actually this year. His first year was in 1985, volunteering with us every Tuesday. Wayne Nelson was with us for that entire time. And we have brokers that have been on the air anywhere. I think most of them have been on the air at least 10 years now, but many 15 or 20 or 25 years. We talk about the markets each and every day because I'm mostly in corn and soybean production area, and because I came from a grain farm. I have 4 brothers that still farm and 2 nephews in Logan County, which has oftentimes been the highest cash rent county in the nation, according to USDA, just near Springfield. I tend to really work on the idea of, what are cash prices today? But I talk about the markets as it's related to the CME group in Chicago every day of the week on a program called the Closing Market Report, and then one on called Commodity Week, which is much more like what we're doing right now, where there's a panel of us. The Closing Market Report always starts with a broker conversation, followed up by something that might come from things of interest. For instance, today, US EPA in this week made the announcement that they're going to try to move the CAFE standards, and the ethanol folks are not very happy about that. They're going to put forward a lawsuit. So I talked to Harold Woolley, who's the president of the National Corn Growers Association, in the last hour about that. But more often than not, I'll talk with the agricultural economists, not only here on this campus, but across the whole of the Midwest, to get an idea of what they're doing, maybe the crop scientist from those areas to see what's up with weed science. And then the hidden part that I think is always the best part of the program is the meteorologist. We have five different meteorologists on, but we talk with the players in the marketplace. Drew Lerner, who's a name you'll know, I talk with every Wednesday. Eric Snodgrass is our Friday. So if you recognize his name from Nutrient Ag Solutions, Drew, of course, is with World Weather Incorporated. And I know them all well. I talk to them regularly, and we talk about not only what is happening here, but because logistics across the planet are so very important, in the wintertime, we will talk about every day what's happening in Argentina and Brazil. And then we switch, of course, to the Northern Hemisphere during the growing season at this time of year. And that's sort of the background. But the programs have been the same since 1985. And they've really had staying power. They just have.
Well, it's great to have you, Todd. And I mean, we're very familiar with the guests that you have, and a couple are also friends of the show as well, including Mark Russo. You mentioned some of your weather analysts. We've had Dr. Irwin on from the University of Illinois, too. So it's great to have all these amazing names with great experience in the industry. In terms of what you've been seeing and hearing from all of your esteemed guests over the last couple of weeks, Todd, I'd assume, obviously, yesterday's WASDE report is going to be a big talking point, as it was yesterday afternoon on your show, and then how the market ultimately tries to anticipate that end of June acreage report, which is now going to rapidly approach here over the next couple of weeks. What's kind of been the theme or some of the talking points recently on the show?
I would say that, to their credit, the agricultural economist last August started to tell producers they needed to sell old crop, particularly corn and soybeans, and they needed to sell way sooner than later, and some of them even earlier than that. They maintained that stance until now. That they needed to market. Of course, farmers haven't. There's old crop around. Interestingly, I talked with an analyst in western Iowa, west of Fort Dodge, prior to where they start to roll heavily in the western part of Iowa. Talked to him earlier in the year about how their planting season had gone. They'd had 8 inches of rain. They did get planted. They were at $5 cash. They have, I think, 8 ethanol plants around the area. So the question was, why are they $5 cash? And so I asked, did you have a bad crop last year? The answer was the year before, of course, they had a rough year. So they're still trying to fill the pipeline there. And it depends where you are. Can we get $5 cash here? Heck no, not at all. So on old crop and new crop, mostly everybody is still saying, if you need to market on the rallies and pick where you want to, but have your orders in, especially for old crop. Just have the cash order in and make that. Just go ahead and make that. So that's kind of where that frame of, I don't know, there are 25 analysts in any given week, and I have about 60 or 70 that I talk to fairly regularly. So everybody's kind of been in that place. There are some that want to get bullish, particularly earlier in the year with the wheat market rally, but now we're in the midst of harvest here, and what may have taken place with those frosts in Russia, particularly parts of Ukraine now with the drought spreading, already built in. And we know what happens when you have those things. The market goes up and then just down. It doesn't stick around very long. There is kind of a long tail after the fact, but the spike is not all that long. So there were some following the wheat higher for a while, but that appears to be over at the moment.
Yeah, appears to be over at the moment. And USDA did confirm some of that Black Sea production reduction that you mentioned there, Todd. But yeah, I mean, the market was already, like you said, it felt like was pricing that in. That peak did not last long, as you said. Again, we've got a little bit of strength here today, but I think managed money is probably finding itself in a position where yesterday's report didn't give them a lot to work with in terms of feeding the bulls, but they have to keep in mind their net short position. How exposed might they be maybe as we run into that end of June acreage report, and also the stocks on and off farm as of June 1st. So it's going to be a pretty interesting run as we head into that report and through the 4th of July. So thank you for those insights, sir. Jake, want to give you a moment here to talk about what's happening in the feed markets. What's your take following that WASDE report? Does anything change in the feed markets near term for you?
I don't think so. Not in any big way here. I think what we've been preaching to our feed buyers aligns pretty well with what you're talking about there, Todd. Getting the grain producer to sell on the rally, and then we have the feed buyer just kind of waiting this thing out, staying pretty short term in their purchasing, at least on the corn front, as we expect this thing to probably continue a slow grind lower as we get this next crop in the ground and popping up and head our way on over towards harvest. So our expectation after yesterday's WASDE is that we still have overall healthy balance sheets, both domestically and globally on the corn front. The soybean number looks as good as we've seen in quite some time. And so while we're dealing with a short-term squeeze, or what we're expecting to be a fairly short-term squeeze on protein, as North American supply is kind of pinched with shutdowns for repairs and maintenance at these crush plants, as well as some logistical issues and some export strength out of Canada. Overall, the plan remains the same: to be patient here, wait for some better opportunities as we move through the summer months. Barring any major weather catastrophe, we're expecting some pretty nice returns towards where we would call old normal. In fact, we've already seen some new crop basis offers in different little pockets of the Midwest back to what we would consider old normal in our target ranges, particularly for corn. I suspect that becomes more widespread as this stuff continues to catch some heat units and get up out of the ground there. We may be able to get a hold of some fairly good prices sooner rather than later. Our latest planting progress had corn at 95% planted or so, and beans were over the 85% mark, which means more and more folks are going to be coming out of the field and hopping back in a truck to bring grain to market, as we've been talking. I think that's our first big catalyst to help push this thing a little bit lower, and we're well on our way to that. Then it's kind of a waiting game. I think the one thing that we've kind of got to start changing our tune on is probably cotton and the cottonseed market. We had been talking about being very aggressive and waiting on prices to break quite a bit across most of the US. I think there's still a chance to get down to some of the numbers we've been talking, but there is some concern. There are folks that are still planting cotton acres as we speak. And we've already had some that went in the ground that got hailed out in some significant production areas in the Texas Panhandle. So yet to see how much damage that will do to overall production. But I think another big factor here is that cotton futures have really slumped, and down there in the 70s, that does not entice a whole lot of aggressive planting. Some folks could switch some acres away at last moment. They may be less inclined to throw all of the fertilizer and chemical at it that they normally do, and that could have an effect on yield. So we're watching that one pretty closely. I think last year having that Lubbock market at a quarter to half of its normal production was a huge hit to availability and really affected price overall. So it'll take a lot to get back down to that sort of production loss again, but we are monitoring, just kind of see how this thing shapes up. Otherwise, yeah, the name of the game still remains patience for a little while longer, I think.
Yeah, and I think that'll be important, Jake, to continue to stress for folks. And again, coming off of this WASDE report, we're seeing some strength, but perhaps, and maybe as Todd referenced earlier as well, I mean, these for the row crop farmers, I think any of the rallies we're getting between now and 4th of July are really potential selling opportunities for these guys, really. I know our grain marketing team has been fairly aggressive, at least on the new crop corn sales, especially on that rally up towards $5 mid-May, and I think are waiting for now, potentially striking distance. We're at 475 and change this morning, or you're potentially within 10 to 15 or 20 cents of maybe those next real targets of getting that next wave of sales, if not even already. I think some folks were even willing to analyze their own cost of production and say, hey, 475, I can make money depending on what basis I have nearby. So it's going to be interesting to see how the farmers react on this latest pop. But yeah, for those buying for feed purposes, we're still hoping that the stars align for a healthy crop here in the U.S. and without any real changes on the global balance sheets yesterday. Hopefully we catch a break here post 4th of July and give some of our dairy and livestock producers a chance to buy some fresh loads as we push into harvest. Gentlemen, before we go, Todd, any closing remarks or statements you'd like to make before we sign her off?
Yeah, one thing. I talked to Frayne Olson, who's an agricultural economist at North Dakota State University Extension based in Fargo. I do that once a month, and that was on Monday of this week. Did ask him about prevent plant because that's one of the things that people start to talk about a lot, especially because there's been so much rainfall in that part of the world, and wanted to know what he thought prevent plant might look like in North Dakota, Minnesota as well, because he's right there on the line. For North Dakota, which is what he's responsible for, his suggestion was usually there's about 1 million acres out of the 25 million total crop acres that they have that goes prevent plant. That swings pretty wildly from one side to the other. He thought there might be a few more acres than that, but not to expect a big prevent plant number out of North Dakota this year. And I think many people are. Honestly, I think many people are. Jake, I'd be interested to know what you think total planted acreage for corn will be. It's at 90 million or 90.5 or something like that at the moment. What do you think farmers actually put in the ground? And I have my own thought on this one. I think they aimed for 92, and that's what they're. And if we're at 91, 92, we could be there. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't recall what I said the other day. It's out there on the internet somewhere, but I'm mostly in agreement with you. I think there's going to be some increase in corn acres, probably 90 and a half, 91 million acres of corn would be my guess. I am no expert, but that's where I stand.
Yeah, me either. I depend on the experts a lot, but I think farmers or others thinking that they're going to be salvation in the acreage figures reduced at the end of being reduced at the end of the month might be sorely disappointed.
It's going to be a really interesting number here in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be excited to hear on your show and some of your guests what folks are saying here in the next couple of weeks. But in the meantime, thanks for joining our show. Really great to have you today, Todd.
Hey, thanks much. And for those who want to listen, right there, willag.org, willag.org. I say it all the time on the radio, but visit that or just search us out in your favorite podcast applications. Look for the closing market report or commodity week. Thank you. I appreciate being along with you, Jim.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, Todd. We appreciate it. We'd also like to thank the Everag Insights crew for their support. Thank you to Paige and Lexi for their production magic. And thank you to the viewers for watching. The grain feed. Contact information is on the screen. We greatly appreciate your feedback. That's all for today. We'll see you next time on the Grain Feed.